This is What the Football. Suzy Shuster and Amy Trask with you. We are psyched to be with you. We have so much to talk about today that I basically just asked Don Bowie, our producer, I'm like, can we just get going? Let's just start rolling. Give me some new music, Mike Del Tufo, and let's get started. This is What the Football, brought to you by Game Time. I want to tell you about this fast and easy way first because I did use it last Friday to go to UCLA Bruins women's basketball with Taylor. I was able to go last second, bought some tickets last minute, got the best deals, the best price guaranteed, and I got to see where I was sitting. And by the way, UCLA Bruins women's destroyed Oregon. It was a great game. But download that app, create an account, use the code WTF for $20 off of your first purchase. Restrictions apply. Visit gametime.co for terms. Again, create the account, redeem the code WTF for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. You know, guys, we get together, we talk about what we want to talk about for this podcast. Amy and I send messages, we call, we email. And by the way, Albert Breer will join us shortly. So we have a great guest today to talk about everything, but I digress. We talk about, in advance. And we both had the same thing coming into this because we feel like you can get look aheads at what's happening this weekend from other places, don't you think, Amy? But we want to be able to dissect stories. And we saw a story that we both said, that's what I want to talk about, but from different perspectives. Don't you feel that way, Amy?
I do.
So I felt right away.
Excuse me 1 second.
Yeah.
I love that when we talk about any particular story, newsworthy, not newsworthy, we do bring different perspectives, and I think that makes the discussion a lot of fun.
Agreed. I watched the game, the Saints-Falcons game, and watched Jameis Winston call that audible, and he said on behalf of the entire team. And I thought to myself, in what world does a quarterback call an audible on behalf of a team? And I get that they wanted to score a touchdown for Jamal Williams, their running back. He said it was a team decision for the Saints to call this audible at the line of scrimmage in a victory formation, which, of course, is the universal code for we're not doing anything. And he said, well, his coach had asked him to take the knee, but they went for it. And Marshall Falk was over last night watching the Michigan game. We obviously tape this on a Tuesday. And I said to Marshall, in what world will Jameis be back? And he looked at me as like, not quite sure there is a world. And Amy, I would ask you what your reaction was. In what world does this happen to a team where a quarterback basically gives his head coach the middle finger?
In what world? When your head coach is Dennis Allen. Suzy, I'm speaking from experience. As you know, I overlapped with Dennis Allen in Oakland for 1 year. And everything I observed during that year is such that when that play happened, I wasn't the least bit surprised. Now, if it happened to any other coach, I would have been surprised. It happened and Dennis was the coach. I was not the least bit surprised. Shortly after Dennis was hired by the Saints, I was asked about him, about his coaching, his leadership on CBS Sports, on that other pregame show, CBS Sports Network. And I answered in the following manner because now I have an addition to that answer. I shared my views of Dennis's leadership, and I use that word in quotes, while he was with the Raiders. And I quickly noted that, look, we can all learn on the job, we can grow on the job, we can improve on the job. I not only grew on my job, I grew up on the job. I grew up on the job, I learned, I made mistakes, and I said, Dennis can do that as well. And what that play made clear to me is he has not changed his leadership style. So was I surprised that that happened? I may have been one of the only people who was not surprised that happened.
Okay, so what do you know that we don't know?
Well, I observed him for a year. I don't know if it was 12 months, but it was obviously for a full season in Oakland. Day one, he's hired, calls a staff meeting or asks that a staff meeting be called of every single person in the organization. And everyone was so excited, and every single department, coaching, trainers, equipment, tickets. I made sure every business department was there. The auditorium was packed. And he got up and he was really rude. Not only didn't he demonstrate leadership, to enthuse the staff and to excite the staff and to lead the staff. He was demeaning. He was derisive. And people walked out of that room just stunned.
Can you give some specifics? Because now I'm fascinated to know what it was that was so rude or...
I'm sorry that I don't have any specific quotes. It was quite a while ago. But my overall impression, and by the way, after that meeting, there was a line, and I don't mean literally a line, but people flooding into my office from the finance department and the video department and the legal department, just looking at me like, what was that? And again, I'm not here. Well, I'm here. I'm right next to you. But my point is not to belabor the past, but I gave him every benefit of the doubt that he would learn and grow from what happened in Oakland. Just like as I said, I learned on the job. I grew on the job. I made mistakes on the job. I like to believe I improved on the job. I gave him the same benefit of the doubt that he could go to New Orleans and learn from what went wrong in Oakland, where the locker room, there's that expression, he lost the locker room. I don't know that he ever had the locker room to lose it. But what I saw in that game, when Jameis indicated that, yes, he knew the team was instructed to take a knee in a victory formation, but the team decided not to do that, that told me everything I needed to know.
Yeah, he was fired 4 games into his third year. What did you see in particular in that locker room?
It wasn't in the locker room. I use the word the locker room sort of in the broad sense. Players' demeanors on the sideline during practice, a lack of energy, a lack of passion. There are coaches for whom players would run through a wall. That's an old expression, but there really are coaches for whom players would run through a wall and for whom players would do anything. I saw the opposite in our team. It appeared to me, and I'm not putting words in a player's mouth, but players would do the minimum for him.
And it's so interesting because there are so many coaches that aren't doing well, like Bill Belichick, or even this week, Ezekiel Elliott comes out and says he's been the best coach I've ever had. That's 1 year after many years with the Cowboys. There are coaches that we refer to as players coaches. And it seems to me that you're unpacking maybe a history of him being the opposite.
Well, and you're absolutely right that some coaches are denominated player coaches. I don't believe you need to be a, quote, player coach, close quote, to have players respect you. You made the perfect example of Bill Belichick. You pointed that out. Nobody's going to say, oh, he's a player's coach, but players respect him and play for him. Look at DeMeco Ryan in Houston. Did you see the reaction of that team, both on the sideline, in the tunnel, and in the locker room when they clinched the division? Those are players and a coach who are working together, all of whom are trying to, or each or all, are trying to make the others be their best. I had the sense, and some players shared with me, that that was not what they experienced with Dennis. And again, we all grow up, we all grow. I thought he could be better in New Orleans, and I may be the only person to tell you this, but when I saw that in New Orleans, I was not the slightest bit surprised. Any other coach, I'd have been stunned.
Can you share who the players were that were...
I would if I could remember who they were, Suze, but it was over a decade ago.
I don't remember what I had for dinner last night.
Well, you know what? Now that you mention it, neither do I.
I don't know if I did I have dinner last night?
If they occur to me as we're talking, I won't hesitate to share with you. But I will say that I do remember some were veterans, seasoned veterans who'd played for a lot of coaches, and it was the first time in my career I'd seen that. Now, look, Al had a lot of coaches while I was with the team. Some of those coaches did well, some did not, but I never experienced anything. Again, it's hard for me to describe that first staff meeting where every single person who worked in every single office, every department was in that auditorium, and this was a moment for him to incentivize everyone and excite everyone and build a feeling of teamwork that we're going to improve together as a team. He was dismissive of everyone. He was derisive. He was just, frankly, to use an easier word that's not multisyllabic and doesn't begin in D, he was rude.
I thought you were going to go with a different D word. That was
I could, but I don't know if that would have to be bleeped on a podcast.
I don't know, Dawn. Can we go with that one? I think we'll just.
No, I mean, just look. There are men for whom, coaches for whom people would run through a wall. There are women for whom people would run through a wall. Nobody's running through a wall for him.
No, I think that we all can relate to that feeling of when you start something new and you go into the conference room and you're so fired up and you walk out and you think, what the hell just happened?
That's exactly, Suzy, you just summed it up, and you weren't in the room, and that was exactly what happened. People were walking into my office looking at me like, what the hell just happened? And here I am trying to be a teammate and say, well, maybe he's not used to addressing a big group, but it became very clear he just was not nice.
Yeah. I can't wait to get Albert Breer's take on this, because we have so many, everything we come upon in this conversation, the Texans, if we talk about any of these coaches that we're debating, Albert will have some info and help us along with this. But the fact to me that Allen hasn't been fired yet on a Tuesday, I think is remarkable. It seems to me like he has 100% lost this locker room. And we were talking about Jameis Winston having resigned on his birthday a couple of days ago for a new contract, which means nothing. They can let him go. But I can't imagine how you move forward into this next season with a quarterback. Yes, he's the backup. But if the whole team, and there was a great back and forth, and if you haven't seen it, go find this video of Jameis Winston talking to a reporter who keeps saying, respectfully, and we all know what happens with respectfully. It's like, with all due respect, whatever you say afterwards is what you really mean after, with all due respect. I was nervous watching it because I found it to be so tense. But if the whole team made the decision to abandon the victory formation and score a touchdown that means nothing, that's the perfect evidence that he has lost the confidence of the entire team.
And perhaps more than the confidence. And it's interesting because, as is often the case, you and I had different reactions to that interview and that video of Jameis. It made you uncomfortable or nervous, I think you said. It made me feel really good about Jameis because he was doing what I believe in doing, which is disagreeing agreeably. And he was telling that reporter, look, I disagree. I'm doing it respectfully. I disagree. He held his ground. Two more things. One, if they retain Dennis as a head coach, a lot of people will say, well, then they need to get rid of Jameis Winston just to prove a point. Let me tell you something. They get rid of Jameis Winston to prove a point and support Dennis, he may lose a lot more of that locker room.
No doubt.
But, you don't just cut someone out of a business. I'm not simply talking football, but if he says, I'm getting rid of him because he disrespected me, guess what? A lot more people may as well. Sometimes people disrespect you and you need to find a way to work together. The other thing is, I said something very flippantly when I last talked about that staff meeting, and I said he wasn't nice. And I was being somewhat silly. I was thinking of the movie Mean Girls. You don't have to be nice. I want to make that clear. You don't have to be nice. There's a lot of very, very good leaders who aren't sweet and nice and loving, but they're leaders, and Dennis wasn't.
Yeah, and it's funny because you are known throughout football as somebody who is like kind and compassionate, caring, but nobody pretends you weren't a murderess in a business meeting.
Well, and that's right. And I will forever, ever love Princess of Darkness is my nickname. And the point is, it was not bestowed upon me in a complimentary manner. Mike Silver wrote an article in Sports Illustrated in which he quoted unnamed sources saying, we call her the Princess of Darkness behind her back. And you know what? I loved it. And Raider fans loved it. And frankly, I think we should probably call me that on this podcast just because it's the best nickname ever. But the point is right. It is not mutually inconsistent to be as hard and tough and strong as you need to be, and yet also care about people.
So let's talk about Jameis Winston for 1 second before we set up for Albert Breer, because I'm so excited to have him on.
I am too.
He's in a really precarious position. He's clearly beloved by his teammates. He's in the backup side of life. The role of the black quarterback in the NFL is, as one of my good friends who's a Hall of Famer said to me, is a precarious one. But he is in a position to, look, he signed this deal, which, as we know, he can be cut at any time. He'll get paid. He'll receive money, I believe. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a business person. And we glanced through it very quickly, but I just wonder how you have both moving forward. This seems to me like it's a head scratcher.
Well, and I think Dennis can demonstrate leadership if they both are there going forward, because it could send a very, very powerful message if Dennis is able to work through things with Jameis and say, you didn't adhere to what I instructed. You gave me your reasons. I didn't like it, but let's sit down and let's work this through. And if they do, and if he retains Dennis, if I'm another, not Dennis, if he retains Jameis, if I'm another player on that team, I respect that. I'm like, you know what? The coach found a way to understand why we did what we did, and he and Jameis have worked through this, and we're moving forward. I think it's dangerous for them to get rid of Jameis, because that sends a message that if the coach doesn't think you're his guy,
right,
you're gone, irrespective of what other players think of you and irrespective of whether the team needs you.
And it looked like Dennis was going to lose his job because his team was losing until the last couple games, what they win the last 5. And it looked like he just might lose because they were in the toilet. But now, see, if I own this team, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do, because it leaves the season feeling, or not leaving the season quite yet, but it makes you feel like, who's running this crazy asylum?
Well, again, none of that surprised me. In that game, New Orleans won, and they still were alive for a playoff spot. Had Seattle and Green Bay games gone differently, they'd be in the playoffs, and then this might be being evaluated differently. But again, my biggest takeaway from that play was I wasn't surprised by it, given who the head coach was.
Yeah, Saints finishing the season 9-8, his first winning season in his tenure there with the Saints. We will ask Albert Breer about this situation in New Orleans when he joins us in a moment. We'll also ask him about Mike Vrabel, who, of course, was fired this Tuesday. Questions about who will replace Bill Belichick when Bill Belichick then leaves. D'Amico Ryans, let's talk about him. And let's look ahead at the playoffs, too. Give the people what they want.
And in regard, looking ahead, I also have a question for him about the Chiefs. Now, how's that for a little bit of a tease?
That's a tease, Aim. But first, I'm going to tell you about my favorite app, which is GameTime.co. And again, if you were listening 20 minutes ago, then you know that I just used it on Friday. It's awesome, you guys. It's so easy. And I'm such a moron when it comes to tech. Amy will tell you. I'm constantly trying to find things, but with Game Time, it's super easy. And we have so many kids. I'm buying so many tickets to all different kind of events and venues. Game Time's easy because it's all in with pricing. And I have so many different games to go to. And I go there and I get everything in one fell swoop. And I find them last minute because I'm always late. So they also have the Game Time guarantee, which means you get the best price. Because, by the way, with like 5 people in the house, that's a lot of money in tickets. So it's a good thing I have my own promo code. Use the promo code WTF for $20 off of your first purchase. Restrictions apply. Visit GameTime.co for terms. Again, create an account. Redeem the code WTF for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thrilled to have Albert Breer join us now, as of course we would be. And Albert, I'm just telling you right now, life is much better now that Rich Eisen is a happy person after Michigan won the national championship. But you don't know anything about that, do you?
Oh, it's been a few years. Yeah. I'm happier to be talking to you than your husband right now, Suzy. How's that?
Well, yes, of course.
Probably not the day for me to talk
Excuse
to
me.
him.
I would hope that would always be the case.
Well, I had to say, like, with the Ohio State background that you have everywhere around your head, it's a good thing you didn't go on with Rich, because he would probably say some decisive, derisive things about it in the background. Yeah. But I try to take a higher road.
He kind of like showed his stress a little last night on Twitter, though. I mean, I'm sure you got to experience it, but you know, my wife here, she during Ohio State games, it's like can be felt through my house. And you know, like I said to you guys, just for the listeners' benefit here, like I said to you guys off the air a second ago, my dog runs into a corner and stays in the corner of our bedroom when Ohio State games are on. And I don't watch in the bedroom; I watch downstairs. But he wants to get as far away from me as possible because he can feel the stress. So maybe that's one thing me and Rich can relate on.
And when you did share that with you, Albert, I noted that I serve as counsel to your dog. And number one, don't do that to my client. And number two, give my client extra treats, please.
Yeah. But by the way, when Michigan scored, and anytime Michigan scores, Rich gets up, he starts screaming and hollering and hooting, and Marshall was there, and our friend Jimmy was there, and a bunch of the kids, and the dogs start attacking each other because they're golden retrievers, so attack guys with quotation marks, but they start fighting with each other when Rich is like, woo, just screaming in the house and running around, but they think that's a sign for their dad's losing their mind, so there was a lot of losing minds last night, you can imagine.
Yeah.
We were just talking about Dennis Allen and James Winston and how bizarre that's going to be. I would have loved to have started with that, but the news that Mike Vrabel was fired today on this Tuesday came out, and I'm wondering your reaction to this.
I mean, it's obviously a little stunning. The word "fired," I think, is what's stunning about it. There have been enough rumors floating around. I think some of them are wrong still, but enough rumors floating around that he might wind up being out. This wasn't completely off the board. I think the availability of the New England job sort of, heightened that over the last few weeks. I don't think this is about the relationship between him and Rand Carthon, though. I know that's been out there. I think as much as anything else, this is about, the owner there, Amy Adams Strunk, looking for a certain structure and not finding it with Mike as part of it. And, I think I think if you look at like the history of of the last 7-8 years there, you can go back to when John Robinson was hired, and then they keep the interim coach, and then Mike Mularkey's there, and they win their first playoff game in 14 years. And Mike Mularkey is fired, a couple days later after he had said something a week before that. Then they align Vrabel and Robinson, and Robinson gets fired, 4 years later based on the A.J. Brown trade. And I think she wanted a more, open, friendly environment. So, and forward-thinking environment. So she goes to, mind the Niners to get that, and they bring in Rand Carthon. And then as they're building out that environment, oh, wait a minute, now maybe Mike Vrabel doesn't fit into it. So, I think as much as anything else, like if you look at like the history of this and the way it's played out, it sort of feels like an owner doesn't know exactly what she's looking for and has been looking for something different at different points. And it's led to some instability in the organization. And, I think that's to get rid of a coach the caliber of Mike Vrabel as a part of that, I think is a really tough thing. And it's going to put a lot of pressure on people there. Amy, Rand, the other people in that building to get the head coaching hire right, because I do think Mike's going to be able to go somewhere else and be successful.
Well, I love the points that you just made in every regard as to Amy, the other Amy, I should say, and what she's looking for, because when I learned of this firing, it immediately brought to mind something I'm known for saying, which is, and do what? She fired Mike Vrabel. I hope that she and the organization asked of themselves, and do what? Because if the answer isn't at a minimum as good as Mike, and one would expect or hope they need to believe it's better than Mike, then what are they doing?
Yeah, and and I think like as much as anything else, Amy, I think this is about finding a plan and sticking to it. And I think veering from this plan, from their previous plan, in sort of like a scattershot way, when they fired John Robinson a year ago, they were 7-5 and in first place, and they'd won the division 2 years in a row. So they were fighting for their third straight division title. Now, were things perfect? No. The roster wasn't in a great place after 2022, and she saw that coming, I'm sure. And, there were other things that maybe needed to be modernized and all the rest of it. But it's okay. Like, so we're going to do this 1/2 measure, and then, we're going to keep our head coach because we really love our head coach, but let's go with this plan over here. And it's like you're making moves that are sort of like sovereign to each other. Like, like the moves don't really tie together. And so I think that's why it's really important now for Amy to look at what she's got in the building, and Rand in the front office, and look at what she's got in the roster, and look at the, I think what's going to be a relatively long-term build in front of her, and pick a plan and stick to it. And, like and find somebody who fits what Rand Carthon is building in the front office, what, people like, Chad Brinker are building in that front office, and find a coach that fits with them and tie them together and basically tell them, and I know this is, something that's can be hard to stick to sometimes, but basically tell them, you guys are tied to each other and that's it, and if one of you goes down, everybody's going down. I think they have to find a way to, create something organizationally that's a little bit more tied together than it has been over the last year.
So do you have a hunch who it might be?
I mean, the one name that I think is, the obvious one would be Bobby Slowick, who, was with Rand in San Francisco. He's the offensive coordinator with the Texans now. For what it's worth, the Adams family, they still live in Houston, even though they own the Titans. So there's a lot of exposure there to what's gone on in Houston this year. And if you're looking for a young offensive coach, Bobby's, at the top of some lists. And obviously he's done a lot of good with CJ Stroud. So that's the obvious one. Now, I think if you had done this a year ago, and you had Rand coming over from San Francisco, he might have actually hired D'Amico Ryans, and, again, like that's something that, that staff there in Houston is something that Amy and her family are exposed to because they live there. And so, I think if you're looking for a way to kind of build an organization that's going to be collaborative, where people are going to be tied together, where people know, there's one way we're going to do things, and it's either going to work or it's not. But, if one of us goes down, all of us are going to go down. I think you have to find somebody who is going to align, with Rand in that front office. And that doesn't mean that it necessarily has to be someone who has background in San Francisco. But certainly there'd be less guessing on that if you have somebody who's worked with Rand before.
I love what you said about finding a way to work together. Albert, I have long said that if I owned a business and an employee came to me and said, it's him or it's me, my answer would be either you two find a way to work together or you're both gone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what, it's amazing, Amy, is like, in my years covering the NFL, like the percentage of organizations that are screwed up because people can't get along is staggering, and I don't know if it's this way in every business because, like this is what I've done for my entire professional life. But like the amount of times that owners will hire GMs and coaches and just guess that they'll get along or project that this is going to work, and then it blows up in their face. I mean, the same mistakes are made over and over and over again. And so, there are examples of guys coming from different backgrounds and coming together and working together and it working. But you better be real sure if you're going to do that. And if not, it makes sense to take the guesswork out of it and get guys who you already know are aligned. Because again, like I think the number one thing that takes these organizations down, that makes teams lose, that makes organizations dysfunctional, is having a bunch of people who are not on the same page and who get into a situation because of that 2 or 3 years down the line where it just, it turns into the Hunger Games. You see it way too often across the NFL. And it's really amazing to me how often owners don't learn from the lessons that are right there for them.
Well, that plays right into the conversation that I want to have with you now about New England, because how do you believe Vrabel's availability will affect Kraft's decision on what to do with Belichick?
I think he's already made his mind up on Belichick, Suzy. So I think that on Belichick, this is more about how it looks and whether or not those guys can play ball with each other. In other words, Kraft has been up for the Hall of Fame. It's very important to him that he gets in, right? And his legacy is important to him, as it should be, as it would be for anybody who'd be in that position, right? So, the way the Brady thing played out 4 years ago, I think marks all of this. And so, if you're Bill, are you willing to play ball with like a mutual parting of ways that makes everyone look, like classy, right? Yeah, you probably would be. You might be okay with that. But would you be okay with that if that means the Patriots are, holding you to your contract and saying, we'll do it as long as we get a draft pick from someone else? Well, now you're talking about something else. And Bill could certainly say in that circumstance, well, wait a minute, like I just gave you 24 years that are better than any coach has ever given any team ever. And you're gonna hold me to my contract when you're getting rid of me, and you're gonna force the team that I'm going to give up a first or a second round pick that I could spend on a player. No, I'm not doing that. So, I think what this week is about, as much as anything for the for the Krafts and for Belichick, is A, figuring out where it all went wrong, which is part of all these discussions always, and then B, figuring out what the best way to separate is. And, you'd hope, based on all they've accomplished together, that it wouldn't come down to Kraft saying, we need to get draft picks for you if you're going to go somewhere else, and Belichick saying, okay, then fire me. But I wouldn't rule something like that out either.
And then the Hall of Fame red jacket that Vrabel wore when he got inducted into the Patriots Hall of Fame is still in the
Vrabel. My answer was too long.
No. I'm bringing it back around, Albert, because that's what I do. But it's still in the plastic bag, right? Let me get the joke out, right? Let me just finish it. Let me pay it off, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, is it too soon and too ridiculous to assume, like, I'm from New England, so I'm like, absolutely bring back Vrabel. Let him come home. Let him be loved back in the days where we were winning. So here's the question. Is it a foregone conclusion that Vrabel is the next Patriots head coach?
I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. I think a lot of it depends, again, on that word structure, right? And so, like, I look at, like, Mike, and again, like, I think the idea that there was a huge problem between him and Rand was completely overblown. But I do think that, like, there's a certain structure that Mike would be more comfortable with, which includes the head coach having a lot of say in personnel. And if you look at his history and where Mike has worked and where he played in Bill Cowher's Pittsburgh. He played in Bill Belichick's New England. He worked in Urban Meyer's Ohio State. He worked in Bill O'Brien's Houston, all places that had head coaches who had a lot of say as far as picking the players go. So does Robert Kraft, with his team needing, like, a pretty serious overhaul, I'm sure he loves Mike and would love to have Mike as his head coach. Is he okay with going all in on Mike to that degree? And then, if you're Mike, are you comfortable going to a place that right now doesn't have a quarterback and needs probably a year or two, an offseason or two, to get itself back to where it needs to be? I think those are the most relevant questions. And that's without even getting to the loyalty that Robert has to Gerard Mayo, who, by the way, last year turned down a head coach interview with the Carolina Panthers to remain as linebackers coach with the Patriots, and who came to an agreement with the Patriots where the contracts, and, Amy, you'll understand why they would do this, right? Like, the contracts dovetail. They set it up so Belichick's contract and Mayo's contract expire at the same time, to give Mayo a little protection here. And so, does the loyalty to Mayo come into play? I think that's another factor.
So funny. It's like loyalty is a factor, and yet winning is even that much more important.
And before we dive into something else, I will just say to Albert, based on everything he said, I really do believe Robert and Jonathan Kraft will handle this well. Even if there's a divorce, a separation, they go their separate ways, I think they will handle it gracefully.
I'm sure they will.
Mm-hmm.
That's
so do you think, Amy, if you're them, do you ask for a draft pick?
No, I don't, because I want to do what's best for Bill. And it's one thing to say to Bill, we're going to go in a different direction, but you don't want to handcuff him, if you will, when you do that. Okay.
Because I think that to me is like I think that's one of the operative questions right now is, do you need to get a draft pick back for him? Because remember, they didn't get compensation for Brady.
Well, look, I could be wrong. Obviously, I'm wrong a lot. I could be wrong, but I don't think they will do that. Could they do that? Yes. I don't think they will do that.
Yeah, I think what you said, Albert, is dead on. I think right now Robert's worrying about that bust in Canton, and he loves thinking of himself. And again, I'm biased because I happen to love him, but as a statesman, like, he thinks of himself as an ambassador for the league. And I think it's right now, I think that he's going to tie this up with respect, and he's going to, I think, hand off Bill to wherever he goes next.
You are go ahead. No, you go ahead, Albert.
No, but if I could add one thing too, like, I think it's fair that you are concerned about your legacy if you're an owner, because I think with an owner, and Amy, you were around one of the most famous ones ever. like your image is very fickle. Like how the public perceives you is very fickle, far more fickle than it is for a player or for a coach. And I think there are two good examples of this, right? So what does everybody remember Eddie DeBartolo for? I feel like everybody remembers him for the casino scandal.
100%.
And this is a guy who, when I was a kid, was seen as the absolute gold standard owner, not just in football, but in all of sports, right? And yet the casino things happens, and that's all anybody remembers him for now. Jerry Jones won 3 Super Bowls in his first 7 years in Dallas with 2 different coaches. What does everybody remember that time? What does everybody remember about Jerry from that time? The divorce with Jimmy. It could have been so much better if you didn't have the divorce with Jimmy, right? And my point in saying that is, I think the image of owners is far more fickle and volatile. And so if Robert is protective of his image, I actually understand it, because I think that there's a lot more on the line from a legacy standpoint in a situation like this for someone like Robert than there would be for someone like Bill or Tom.
All right, so image is a perfect way to segue into my questions about Dennis Allen and what happened with Jameis Winston, just because we talked about this at length before you came on. And Amy has experience with Dennis Allen that she shared earlier, and let's just say it wasn't the most positive. So
that's very gracious of you.
Didn't you think so?
Yeah,
that was
wasn't
judicious,
the most,
right?
Yeah, it was. It was.
Albert, what's your reaction to what happened after the game, and how do they survive together? And does Dennis Allen survive at all?
I think Dennis Allen does survive. I think there'll be changes on his staff, probably primarily on the offensive side of the ball. I think it's hard because in a situation like this, you want to empower your players, and every coach, I think, worth his salt, pursues having a team that's player led and player driven. And what you always hear these guys say is if we build the right culture, it's the players that are driving that culture. It's not the coach standing up in front of the room on a Saturday night. It's the players taking ownership of it. And so you want to empower your players. A situation like this, I guess it sort of illustrates the fine line, right? And, I think the intention here wasn't horrible. We've heard the way the people in Detroit talked about Jamal Williams, the way people in Green Bay talked about Jamal Williams. So the idea that the teammates would want to get him a touchdown in that situation, and the fact that Jameis would want to get him a touchdown, it kind of makes sense to me, right? That you want that for your teammate who's been such a great teammate in so many different places. The fact that they wouldn't run by that by the coach is a little bit of a flag.
And it's not just leadership, it's respect for your coach. Again, I can't name one of the other 31 coaches where a player or a team of players would have done what the Saints did without going over to their head coach and saying, hey, look, this is something we really want to do. We want to pay, respect to Jamal. We want to give him this touchdown. In the case of the Saints, they didn't have that discussion. So I'm not suggesting that on another team, players might not have wanted to do this. I am suggesting that I can't think of any other coach in the league now or prior to now that players wouldn't have run to on the sideline and said, hey, can we do this? That the Saints players did this without any communication whatsoever with Dennis, I think speaks to, I'm using the word leadership, but as I think this through, the word I should be using is respect. I don't believe that they respect him as a leader or a coach. And based on my experience in Oakland with him as a head coach, that doesn't surprise me a bit.
That's really interesting, especially when you consider how veteran a roster that is, the amount of older players that they have on that roster. And Jameis isn't new. Jameis is in year 8, right? So he's not a young player anymore either. And then, you would like to see things you have a failed run as a head coach and you'd like to see certain things turn around. And if there are things that you saw in Oakland that are repeating themselves that aren't good, Now in New Orleans, absolutely, that'd be a red flag.
And Albert, I love your point about growing on the job. And I made this point earlier with Suzy, so I won't belabor it. But look, people can learn on the job. They can grow on the job. I made this point when Dennis got the job in New Orleans, that we all learn on the job and grow on the job. Gosh knows I made a lot of mistakes as I learned and I grew, but I like to believe I did learn and I did grow. I hope that would be the case for the Saints. But what I've seen so far is there has been no growth.
Yeah. And so now the question becomes, is it like how much of that is him? How much of that is where the rock? And I think like what you're seeing too is there's this question when you have a really great head coach, if you're just trying to reboot the old program, and is he just running Sean Payton's program? And we talked about player ownership of the program, and I'm sort of thinking my way through this now, but like, talk about player ownership of the program. Is it their program and not Dennis Allen's program? And that might empower them to feel like we're okay to do this.
Here's my question for you. We talked about leadership. Jim Harbaugh, leader of men, Michigan guy. Where's he going? What's he going to do?
I think he's going back to the league. I think it's, a combination of, he's obviously accomplished what he set out to accomplish at his alma mater. He's got 44 seniors leaving. You could say he can leave the program in good shape with, a really, really good head coaching candidate on his staff, and Sharon Moore, who I think would probably get that job. And he has unfinished business in the league. And so, if you're him, like part of the risk with going back too would be like the potential for NCAA sanctions. So, I think he's all along had unfinished business in the league. I think over the last couple of years, interest in him has been very, very tepid, way more tepid than people think it's been. There hasn't been a ton of opportunity for him out there. And I think there probably will be more this year. And I think that like maybe the greatest thing that he can bring to the table is what he's built at Michigan looks just like what he built at San Francisco, looks just like what he built at Stanford, looks just like what he built in San Diego. Mm-hmm. In other words, you know exactly what you're getting. And in that way, I think he's the modern day Bill Parcells.
Ooh, wow.
I think he comes in and shakes a program up and changes things right away. And eventually he could wear people out. And so if you're making this hire, we're not hiring him for 10 years. You have to be comfortable with we're hiring him for probably 4 or 5 years. But I think it's worth it. And so, I think, like the Chargers certainly are the one that like sort of fits the profile the most. The Chargers are also awfully sensitive about two things: the idea that they're cheap and the idea that they're irrelevant in LA. And I think that hiring Jim Harbaugh addresses both of those emphatically, because you're going to have to pay to get him. And I think he would make the Chargers matter a lot more in Los Angeles. And you guys can speak to this better than I can because you're out there. But I think he would make the Chargers matter a lot more in Los Angeles than they do right now. So I think the Raiders will be in the mix. I think the Falcons will be in the mix. I know he touched base with the Panthers last year, so I guess he couldn't rule that out. I'm not sure they go that way. But my guess would be the Chargers will be where he lands.
I have a strongly held view on this view that he wears people out, because my view is if you are wearing people out because you are working like a fiend and pushing everybody else to work like a fiend and pushing everybody else to be their best, then you know what? Wearing people out can be a good thing. And by the way, in related news, Al told me I often wore him out.
Which I think is amazing. The fact that you could wear out somebody like Al, which is kind of insane. All right, so does that mean...
You were there with Al and Jim, right? When they were together?
Yes. Jim was there for, 2002, 2003. And then I loved working with him. He was a phenomenal teammate. He was terrific in every regard within our organization, not just in a coaching role, but in a communicative, collaborative role. I loved everything about him.
I've heard things about those days. Like you guys had a young scout, Ed Dodds, who's up for the Raider job now. And Ed is as good an evaluator as there is. And that'd be one like I would pay attention to. Ed really interviewed well.
Interesting pairing.
Yeah, Ed interviewed really well with the Raiders 2 years ago, and he didn't get the job because Mark wanted to tie the head coach to the general manager and pick the Josh McDaniels, Dave Ziegler pairing, but they really liked Ed Dodds, and Ed at the time was tied to Jim Harbaugh, and the two of them worked together all those years ago, Amy, in Oakland, and I've been told that because of that, they've got a really good rapport. And so, if the Raiders were to hire Ed Dodds as their general manager, that could be a way to maybe try to lure Jim Harbaugh away from Michigan, away from the Chargers, away from everybody else.
I'd be so curious. Is he going to shop for the groceries and cook too, like the tuna, or what's going to happen with Harbaugh? But we'll wait and see where he lands. Can we talk playoffs really quickly?
Yep.
What are the games that appeal to you the most?
Well, obviously the Detroit LA storyline is unbelievable. It's Matthew Stafford getting to go back into Ford Field. And like how beloved he is in Detroit. I have a lot of family from Detroit that I would say very few people in Detroit hold anything that happened 3 years ago against Matthew Stafford. He's still wildly popular there. So him going back in there and getting to play against the Lions, Jared Goff getting to play against Sean McVay, that to me is the juiciest one. I'm really interested in the game that probably nobody's interested in, which is Houston Cleveland.
Oh, I am.
I love that game because I think what Kevin Stefanski and that staff has done is spectacular. To win with four different quarterbacks, to win with their fourth and fifth offensive tackles in a day and age when, people can't find a sixth offensive lineman for their roster, to win with their fourth and fifth safeties. A couple of weeks ago, they won a game with Amari Cooper down. Like they just, over and over and over again have answered every question. And so now they're going into Houston, and on the other side, you got this Texans team where, I can't remember, guys. Can you remember a time when people were so completely down and franchise was as dead as the Texans were a year ago to now? Like, I don't know that there are five teams you'd rather be, like five situations you'd rather be in than the Texans situation over the next 10 years with DeMeco Ryans and CJ Stroud, So we get like these two kind of converging, these two new entities, for the playoffs converging. I'm really, really excited for that one because I think, we'll get to see CJ Stroud on that stage, and they've been really entertaining to watch. And then the whole storyline of the Browns, I think, is fascinating. So those are the two. And then I think, you have, the Ravens and the Niners as the clear-cut one seeds in their conferences. And, I think there's pressure on both teams to win. Man, wouldn't that be cool to see those two teams going head to head in Vegas and in 4.5 weeks? And, maybe the Harbaugh family has another nice night coming.
Two questions for you about the Chiefs. One is, do you expect to see more of the Chiefs we have come to expect over the last several years when the playoffs start? And two, do you give any credence to the gentle flow of some rumors about Andy Reid again, considering that this may be his last season?
So on the first one, this Chiefs team reminds me a little bit of a team I covered, the 2006 Patriots, where and Suzy, you may remember this. They let David Givens go in free agency. They traded Deion Branch before the season, and they'd invested in their offensive line and defense, but that was Brady's 7th year. And it was just sort of like, Tom, go figure it out. And it wound up costing them in the playoffs. And their reaction the next year was to go get Randy Moss, Wes Welker, Dante Stallworth, and go undefeated. I sort of feel like that's what's happened with the Chiefs, where it's like you traded Tyreek Hill, and now Travis Kelce has gotten old. And I don't think Travis Kelce is the same player he's been. And so, now they're sort of in this Patrick go figure it out situation with Patrick, like Tom, in his 7th year. And is it going to be enough? And I think that's sort of where they are going into the playoffs. I think, if they aren't able to win, it could lead to them getting really aggressive the way those Patriots did after the 2006 season. And I think a lot of it's going to come down to, are they willing to adjust their formula? And I think you saw them do this subtly towards the end of the year, where they started to rely on Isaiah Pacheco a little bit more and lean on their defense a little bit more. So I think as far as the here and now goes, it's really about, can they reconfigure their formula or not? And when it gets hot, like when it's really, when you're down or where things are tight in a playoff game, can you lean on a different formula? That's number one. And then as far as the long-term part of it, I think how the playoffs go is going to affect whether or not they get really, really aggressive in the off season. in putting skill talent around Patrick Mahomes, because there is talent on that roster. It's still a really good roster, but as far as the skill player thing goes, they've sort of made the conscious decision. We're going to let Patrick figure this out.
Albert, you are a wealth of information. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry we kept you so long, but there was just, I keep thinking of new things to ask.
We could do this all day. And Albert, I just want to tell you that for me, at least, this was way more fun than when you were asking me questions in the lobby outside owners' meetings.
Well, I miss those days, Amy. That seems like a long time ago.
It was.
Yeah. We had some good, like Suzy, I'm not kidding when I say this. I did learn a lot about the league from Amy, because I actually was young then.
And as opposed to now, you're younger than both of us. So, that's an STF.
Remember, I'm sorry, but do you remember that scene in the movie Harry Met Sally where the woman says, I'll have what she's having?
Yeah.
When I look at Albert, I think I'll have what he's having.
Except for that big shoe in the background, right?
Well, not commenting.
I think my background is tremendous. Guys.
Remind me of the time next time I see you that Jim Tressel, when I was covering him for ABC, like that we were cousins, because he's very into genealogy. He's related to a lot of Schusters.
Oh, is he? Is he? Okay.
He took me in the back. Like, sounds a little dirty. It's not. He's like, I think we're related. And he takes me back in his office, and he gets out this giant. Look, Amy looks horrified.
I do.
I got a lot of weird stories. And he takes out this book of genealogy. And he's like, I knew it. I've watched you. I think we're related. And he shows me this line of Schusters that are related to the Tressels.
That's amazing. He's an incredible person. I took coaching football with him when I was in college. I learned so much in that class. I still have the binder actually right up here. Hang on.
Well, look, he's just moving, so you now see all the Ohio State stuff.
So
his hoodie.
This is a 22-year-old binder with all my notes from my coaching football class in college. It's amazing. And this will resonate with you, Suzy, because you got to know him a little bit. John Cooper was the coach my first 3 years, and when John Cooper was the coach, I had friends who took the coaching football class, and they said that he showed up for one class and the rest was taught by a graduate assistant, right? I took the coaching football class my senior year, which was Tressel's first year. He was in every class. He taught a bunch of them. And then the other ones were taught by his position coaches. And while his position coaches taught, he would sit in the front row and take notes.
He's a good guy.
And by the way, kids,
but Suzy, that's who he is, right?
He was a good old football coach. He was such a pleasure to work with. I had so many games, and he was kind of great. But don't tell Rich I said that.
And do you realize that kids that are listening to this are like, wait, you took notes with a pen? Wait, and a notebook? Right. We did.
Well, this is the other thing. You know what his famous saying from that class? Like, if there was one thing he'd want you to take from that class, and this will make. Like this will make all the analytics people throw up in their mouths, right? His famous saying was, "End every series with a kick."
Oh, I get that.
End every series with a kick,
huh?
Whether it's a field goal an extra
or
point,
right, mm-hmm.
or a punt. End every series with a kick,
because then it would not be a turnover.
Right.
Fascinating. Albert, you're the greatest. Thank you so much. And we really appreciate it.
9-1 against the bad guys too, by the record, but for the record.
Well,
All right, kids.
Hey, Albert, it's been great. Hey, I mean, come on. I got to go home. You know what I mean? Like you and I have this relationship like this, but I got to go live with the other guy.
Yeah.
So we'll leave it at that. Albert, you're the best.
Thanks, Albert.
Looking forward to seeing you here in person. Take care. He's just the very greatest. I think playoffs-wise, we're both interested in the same game. We're both interested in the Chiefs and the Dolphins.
I'm interested in every single game, and I am interested in that game, Suzy, for a lot of reasons. But I sort of feel like standing united with Al Michaels, and maybe I won't subscribe just in solidarity with Al, but it's going to be a great game. Albert Breer mentioned Houston, Cleveland. That's going to be a great one. I can't wait for them all.
I actually, we talked about this last week at length, I look forward to watching CJ Stroud now. I just look forward to seeing him advance. And I can't help it, but DeMeco Ryans is maybe the most likable coach in the National Football League. And as we started the show talking about coaches that players want to play for and those that they do not, I think it's really, really well done to, as a pat myself on the back to close by saying there's no doubt that D'Amico is the coach that all of his players want to play for.
You wrapped that around exquisitely.
Oh, God, the big bucks, they don't pay me to do that. Guys, thank you so much for taking in this edition of What the Football. Again, many thanks to Albert Breer. Amy, I love you. And
Love
we will
you
see
too.
all of you on the other side of this weekend's playoff games.
Can't wait.